From Warren, Representative Ourth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, being a person who represents several rural school districts, all of which have been barely getting by, and it's been a crisis each year for them to try to figure out what has to go. And so many times it's the important things, music and the arts, larger class sizes because teachers have to go, and all the other things. And I rise today to tell you that I really don't understand it because I have a history in this state just like the rest of you. And I think the old saying, those of us who do not learn from history are probably destined to repeat it. Only this time we're not repeating it in a way that I think we should. I think every one of us in this room, that is to say most of the members in this room with a few exceptions, remember the 70s and the 80s. You can remember in the early 70s and the mid 70s wage and price controls because the economy was in the tank. I bet you can remember in 76 and 77 the oil embargo that caused cars to line up for miles and miles and miles because they were afraid they weren't going to get enough gasoline to get to work the next day or make it through the rest of the week. And all of you who were here in the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s into the mid 80s remember that horrible farm crisis that put our economy in the worst situation it found itself in since the Great Depression of the late 20s and the 30s. But back in those days, education in Iowa was a top priority, and the Iowa school systems were ranked number one in the nation consistently year after year after year. And I would submit to you today that that was no accident. That happened because the legislature and our governors made public education in this state their top priority because they knew that you do not cut your way to prosperity, you invest your way to prosperity. And investing in our human capital, beginning with our children, used to be our top priority. When I was a sophomore in high school in 1974, state supplemental aid was 8%, 75, 76, 10.7%. Under wage and price controls and gas lines, this legislature sat state supplemental aid at 10.7%. We had no money. It was worse then than it is now. And our legislature back then set allowable growth at almost 11 times what the proposal is to do today. When I was a senior in high school and a freshman in college in Lamoni, 7.84%. My sophomore year in college in Lamoni, 9.42%. The economy was moving downward toward the very bottom of the barrel with that terrible farm crisis. 79-80, 9.48. 1980-81, one of the worst years of the farm crisis, 13.5%. We were in the economic crisis of the 20th century. People were being foreclosed upon. Co-ops were closing, families were breaking up, and the Iowa General Assembly redoubled their dedication to education in Iowa with 13.5%. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would submit to you today that this is not a matter of a budget crisis that forces us into this situation. We've been in budget crises worse than this time and time again, as most farm economies find themselves from time to time. But I put before you the evidence that this legislature had a different perspective on public education back in those days, and they were not willing to forsake our children or our children's future just because the current economy found itself in a rough spot. I recommend 3%. By all means do I support this amendment, and I would ask my friends in the legislature to think about this and to perhaps take upon themselves a new day and a new priority, and that is to bring our children and our investment in our children back to our top priority. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.